another exercise that we're going to use while still in the same tutorial. We're going to finish with this particular file, and before I go anywhere I'm going to make a copy of this. So I'm going to save this as street scene 2. In this particular exercise, this additional exercise, what it will do is it will now allow me to introduce a couple of different options, different aspects of selection, namely fill and stroke. Now at the moment I have this content layer. Now that's the gradient map and blurred layer. Okay, I still have the man outline. I don't really need this layer anymore, so I'm going to delete him. So I'm back to my original setup with the original image data still intact. I still have this layer with the man outline still intact as well. So I still have 2 layers. I'm going to make another backup. I'm going to make another duplicate, and I'm going to call this now original content again. So you can see it's very easy to continually keep backups of our layers so we don't degrade the data. So I'm going to turn off now our backup. So I still have this man outline. Now if you remember from a previous tutorial, this layer here, it only has a certain amount of pixel data added. All of this area here is all transparent data, so there's no there's no coloring there at all, therefore no data, therefore that's why I see this checkerboard effect in the background. So really, in actuality, the only pixel information that I have is within this selection. If I right click on the layer, I get the option to use the alpha to selection option. That will now take just the pixel data and it will reselect the information just from this layer. I'm going to go back over to my color picker. I'm going to reset the information to default black and white. Now that this selection is still active and I have my color picker reset to the defaults, I'm going to go to the edit pull down menu, and I'm going to take the information that I have selected and I'm going to fill it with the background color. In other words, I'm going to fill what is currently selected with white. And I click on that and it now has colored that particular fella in white pixels. He still exists in the original layer, so I could reselect him if necessary. But now I've basically made an outline or a ghost of this particular character. Another additional modification that I'm going to apply is the stroke option. Now we've seen this in another tutorial also. So I go to the edit pull down menu and I'm going to use stroke selection. This dialog appears and I can now apply a stroke line around this particular selection. I can define the pixel width that I'm going to use. I can define it as a pattern or as a solid color, and also check that I'm using the continuous line. So what I'm now going to apply is a 4 pixel wide border to the selection. When I click on stroke, and when I deselect, I'll be able to see this border having been applied to the man. So Control Shift A is a deselect. So what you can see now is you can see the white filled in pixels plus this black border. So if I turn back on the original content, you can see now that I've basically colored out this guy here, and he now looks like a cardboard cutout. If I apply the same idea to this guy, okay, so rename that layer man 1. Okay. I'm going to create another new layer. I'm going to call this man 2 outline. Okay. And I'm going to redo the selection process, but I'm not going to spend as much time with the selection process for this particular file. Unfortunately, he doesn't get as much time as the other guy. Okay. So I'm going to use the scissors select tool again. I'm going to be very quick about the selection that I use. Again, the more time you spend on the selection, the better the outline will actually be. But you can see, even though I'm spending very little time, the selection, the edge detection is quite good. So some very rough clicking, and you can see there's my current selection. So I now hit return. That gives me a selection, but again it's not on the right layer. It should be on this layer. The magic, the scissor select was able to pick out from all the layers below, which is actually good, because other than that I would have a pretty bad selection if I was going on the wrong layer. Do the same idea, edit, copy, go to the layer here, edit, paste, and anchor the selection into that layer. So now I have a second man on a second layer. And I repeat the same process that I just did for this fella here. I right click, alpha from selection, picks up just him. I fill with the background color, fills him in white. Now if I was to deselect now, okay, you can see all the rough edges. Okay, that's where my selection process was quite quick. So obviously adding the border here smooths out a lot of things. So if I again right click on alpha selection, brings up the same outline, and I now apply the same stroke selection option, 4 pixels wide with a solid color on a continuous line. I click on stroke, it goes off and it puts a border onto this guy also. Now again, it's a little bit rougher and you can see some dodgy effects there. So what you can see now is that because I was very lazy in my selection method, it's had a knock-on effect on the quality of the outline that I've created. Now as these two layers here are independent from the original, this content here can be moved. So if I was to take the move tool, and if I was to pick him, I could take that fellow there and I could move him to a new location. Now that I've taken him to the new location, I can deselect everything. And you can see what this is here is the layer boundary. Okay, so I can layer to the image size. Okay. And what it will do is it will reset the layer boundary. It's just, even though there's nothing there, it was actually transparent pixels. It's just something that GIMP does. When I moved everything, I moved the whole layer, not just this fella here. So it moved the layer boundary also. So I've just reset that layer boundary. So the layer will now resize to the image. So another effect that I'm going to apply is I'm now going to create a fake shadow for this particular guy here. So obviously he's not here, but if you wanted to create a fake shadow in this particular direction, what I'm going to do is again I'm going to take him and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to rename that. I'm going to call him onto shadow. So what I will do again is I will alpha to selection, so I'm picking up all the pixels of this. Instead of filling to the background color, I'm going to fill to the foreground color. So I'm going to fill him in completely black. So now this is a black outline of the guy. So I have 2 layers, exactly the same pixel fill data, but different coloring has been applied. So I'm now going to take alpha to selection, and I now have this area here selected. So this is the shadow layer, and I'm now going to apply perspective. Okay, so the perspective tool is sitting in the main toolbox, and when I click on it, it will ask me now, or it will give me the options, the grips. And you can see there's a perspective dialog box which I'm just keeping out of the way. If I go to each corner, it will allow me then to drag the content of the layer or the content of the selection around. So what I'm doing is I'm tweaking the position of the nodes. Now this isn't an exact art. Okay, it's not the proper way to create shadow. Proper way to create shadow is have somebody there that actually does cast a shadow. So you're essentially faking shadow here, so it's not going to always work out correct. So once I have basically got the shadow in the right orientation, something that I would be happy with, okay, I now come along and I transform. And what it will do is it'll take the content and it will apply that transformation. Okay, and there you can see that's my selection. So I'm going to deselect, okay, and I'm going to actually float back in. Because it creates a floating, I'm going to anchor that back into the original layer. So you can now see, well, there's the shadow, but obviously because the layer is stacked on top, okay, I need to reverse this layer situation. The outline needs to be on top of the shadow. Once it goes on, now you can see there's the shadow being cast. But obviously this is a very dark shadow, and comparing it to this shadow here, I know the orientations aren't the same, but you can see it's not a solid, okay, it's not the perfect ray of light shining down, creating the perfect shadow. So in order to fake this even more, I'm going to change the opacity of the layer. So the opacity of the layer can be turned down, and as I turn it down, the amount of content, the amount of light that's let through, apologies, wrong layer, make sure it's the shadow layer that I'm changing. So as I change the value of opacity on that particular layer, you get to see now that you're creating transparency in the layer. So it's a case of fake shadow. So I could raise it up a little bit darker to try and match what we see over here. A little bit darker again. So in that case there I have essentially a cardboard cutout, which was one particular method of isolating information, and also a fake shadow, which is just not something you would try probably all the time, but it's just the use of a couple of different tools. Some opacity, again some alpha to selection, some perspective skewing, and just to create a simple effect.